Howdy, my name is Paul and I'm here today to show you how to set up and configure Asterisk running on the Broadband-Hamnet network. This video is going to be divided up into 4 separate parts. Part 1 is going to consist of installing or loading Asterisk onto the Raspberry Pi. Part 2 is going to be about configuring the Broadband-Hamnet node. Part 3 is going to be about setting up the extensions, and once you have the extensions set up, it'd be good to place a phone call. So Part 4 is going to be about setting up the phones. A couple items you're going to need before we get started here. One, you're going to need a Raspberry Pi, a power source for that Raspberry Pi, at least a 4 GB SD card, enough Ethernet cable. You're going to need a Broadband-Hamnet network node, and any VoIP or ATA phone will work just fine. So with all that said, let's get started. So the first step in setting up and configuring Asterisk on the Broadband-Hamnet network is to install and load Asterisk onto the Raspberry Pi. So if you head on over to www.raspberry-asterisk.org, and once you're here, go ahead and click on the downloads. What this program is it's a distribution with Asterisk and the web configuration for the Raspberry Pi PBX server that we are creating. So after you click on download, scroll down to latest image and you're presented with 2 options, either the torrent or using hypertext terminal protocol to download your zip file that contains the image. Go ahead and click on one of these and download either the torrent or the zip file. Save it to a location of your choice, and once the download has finished, go ahead and extract it to a directory of your choice, and we'll come back to that directory of our choice a little bit later when we're writing the image to the SD card. So after it has finished downloading, the next site we are going to go to is elinux.org/rpi_easy_sd_card_setup, or elinux.org/rpi_easy_sd_card_setup with underscores between each word. What this website does is it allows you to follow instructions on loading an image to an SD card that is to be used on the Raspberry Pi. So under Create Your Own using Windows 7 or Windows XP, we're going to go ahead and click on that and use a Win32 disk imager program to writing the image to the SD card. So we've already downloaded the distribution we wanted from raspberry-asterisk.org. We've already extracted it, and so now we need to go ahead and insert the SD card into the computer and download the Win32 disk imager utility. Once we've downloaded the utility, we are going to go ahead and navigate to that image file that we extracted from raspberry-asterisk.org. And under device here, we're going to go ahead and select the device drive that Windows assigned to the SD card. And after you do that, go ahead and click write. This process will take about 20 to 30 minutes to complete, depending on the speed of your SD card. It could be faster, it could be slower. It all depends on the type of SD card you have. But once it's finished, it will say that it is finished writing the image. Go ahead and click OK and then exit, and then safely eject that SD card, insert it into the Raspberry Pi, and in step 2 we'll power everything on and configure the Broadband-Hamnet node with Asterisk running on the Raspberry Pi. Now with Asterisk loaded onto the SD card, and since we have that now plugged into the back of the Raspberry Pi, we're going to go ahead and take 2 Ethernet cables, and we're going to plug one into the front of the Raspberry Pi and to the back of the Broadband-Hamnet node. And we're going to take our second Ethernet cable here, we're going to plug it into the back of the Broadband-Hamnet node, and then plug the other end into the back of the computer. With those 2 items plugged in, we're now going to take our power cord to our Broadband-Hamnet node, go ahead and power it on, and we're going to take our power cord for our Raspberry Pi, we're going to go ahead and plug that in here and turn it on as well. Now What we're interested in seeing is the DMZ light right here to go from green to being off. When it is turned off, we know that we are now ready to go into the Broadband-Hamnet node setup menu to go ahead and further configure the Raspberry Pi onto the Broadband-Hamnet network. So with that DMZ light off, let's go ahead and point it to http://local node 8080. We are now presented with the configuration screen for a Broadband-Hamnet network. Now what we are going to do is going to head over to the setup, and we're going to type in our username and password. We're going to go over here to the port forwarding DHCP and services button, and we are going to notice something a little bit different. We're going to have here RasPBX, which is our Raspberry Pi running the Asterisk PBX server. And we're going to notice that it has its own unique IP address. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and click Add. This will move it up to the DHCP address reservation. Let's go ahead and change this to whatever you want. I'm going to call it KF5JIMPBX. And I am going to go over here and type asterisk, and I'm going to go ahead and click link, type http://raspbx. That will change because we already renamed it over here under host name and called it KF5JIMPBX. This is going to be on port 80. We're just going to click add. Once we are done here, we are just going to click save changes. And once our changes have been saved, we can check our node status and seeing what services are available by clicking on node status, then clicking on mesh status, and from the looks of here, we have KF5JIM54GS49, and here is the PBX server we just set up on this Broadband-Hamnet network. And so, in the next step, we are going to set up our extensions and then set up our phone. And so we do that by clicking asterisk, and it takes us to the PBX server running on the Raspberry Pi. Before we go in and set up extensions, there's a couple things we need to do before we do that. First off, we need to go ahead and take a look at the downloads page. Now if you scroll down a little bit after the latest images and upgrades, you'll notice that there's some valuable information right here. Configuration details for your MySQL root password, SSH login username and password, along with the default free PBX login username and password. Make note of this because we will be using this in a bit here. There's also something else we need to take a look at. We need to take a look at the documentation for the Raspberry Pi running an Asterisk PBX server. Now under documentation, we just need to go through and follow the instructions under basic setup here. Basically, we need to do the next steps after downloading an image. We've already determined the host name and IP address from setting it up on the Broadband-Hamnet node. And the last thing we need to do is the basic configuration. So how do you do this? Well, first off, what we're going to need to do is go ahead and download PuTTY. You can find PuTTY just by searching Google and typing PUTTY. Click on the first link and it will take you to this page right here. Now what you need to do is go ahead and find the file that best suits your computer and your operating system and download either these guys right here, putty.exe, or the PuTTY installer. It has everything except PuTTytel. So after you downloaded that and either opened up the executable file or installed PuTTY, let's go ahead and pull that up. So here's what PuTTY looks like, and what we are going to do is we're going to type in what we named our Raspberry Pi PBX server. I called it KF5JIMPBX. So that's what we're going to type in, and it's going to be on port 22. We're going to click open. It's going to ask you if you want to accept this key. Go ahead and tell it yes, and then you're going to log in with the username root and the password. Type in Raspberry, and we'd press enter. Now we are logged into the free PBX Asterisk server on the Raspberry Pi. Now if we go back to documentation and we just follow along here, the first thing it tells you need to do, the image is only utilizing 4 gigabytes of your card, even if you bought a bigger one. So if you have a bigger card, you need to type raspi config and then select the option to expand the root file system. So my card here is a 4 gigabyte card, so I'm going to show you what happens when you type it in here. It's going to bring you to a configuration menu that looks like this. You're going to click expand root file system, and it's going to be telling you upon next reboot it will be set to the largest size of your SD card. So with that done, we are going to navigate out of this. Would you like to reboot now? We're going to go ahead and tell it yes. When we expand the root file system on the Raspberry Pi, it's going to take a while to complete. So a way that you can know when it's fully expanded is to go ahead and open up a command prompt window. Type ping -t and then what we called it, KF5JIM-PBX in this example. Now it's going to sit here and it's going to try to ping it. And once we have replies coming back from the PBX server, we know that the file system has been expanded fully. So we can go ahead and close this. So back in PuTTY, we're going to right click this little icon right here. We're going to tell it duplicate session. What this does is it takes all the settings that was in the original session right here and allows it to reconnect to it again. So we can type in the username root, and we can close this other window over here. Do you want to close this session? Yes. So here, once it finishes, we're going to type in our default password again, which is going to be Raspberry. Press enter and see we're back in here. Now you can check to make sure if it's expanded properly by typing df space -h. Now what this does is it shows you the size of the different mount points of the Linux partition itself. So we're finished with step 1. Determining host name and IP addresses. The Broadband-Hamnet mesh node does that for us. So now we move on to basic configuration. So we need to configure our time zone, local settings, and your keyboard settings. So we're going to come here and we're going to type configure time zone. Now we're going to select where we are currently located. And now once we're back at root at raspbx again, we can type dpkg reconfigure locals. So here you are going to select which locals to generate. So for the United States, we're looking for EN US. So here, if we take a look, we have tick marks by it. So ENGB for Great Britain. We can remove these tick marks by pressing the space bar. And now we can create tick marks by also pressing the space bar. So once we have those selected, we can go ahead and press tab, go to OK, and press enter. Tell it the default local for the system and press enter for OK. So once that is done, and type amportal restart and press enter. So now it says starting Asterisk server started. We only need to do this once, and we are finished with the SSH window. Log in with the username and password admin. Change that later on. And then what we can do is we can see here that our Asterisk server is running, our SQL and web and SH server are all running and are all okay, which is great. So now it's time to set up extensions. Now we will go over here to Applications. We will click on Extensions. We're going to set up a generic SIP device. So we're going to click Submit. Under User Extension, we're going to type in the phone number that we want this person to be at. So for demo purposes here, we're going to do 535546. And we're going to type in a display name. The only other item we need to fill in here is a secret. For demo purposes, I'm going to do QWERTY 123, and then we leave the rest of this stuff alone. And we scroll down all the way to the bottom and click Submit. So once we are finished with that, we have one extension set up. We can go ahead and click Apply Config. Now once this finishes reloading, all we have to do is set up the phones to talk to the PBX server and place a call from one phone to another phone over the Broadband-Hamnet. With that, I'll see you in video 4. Now it is time we set up the VoIP phones to communicate over the Broadband-Hamnet network with the Asterisk server running on the Raspberry Pi. Much like we set the port forwarding, DHCP, and services for the PBX server, we do the same thing with the phones as well. When you plug the phone into a Broadband-Hamnet mesh node and turn it on, the mesh node will discover it and it'll be located under DHCP leases. You're going to go ahead and click Add and it'll appear up here. Go ahead and change your host name to whatever you want it to be. And then over here, I named it VoIP. Link it, tell it HTTP. Remember, when we click Save Changes, this will change to the host name we set over here. And then tell it port 80 as well. That's all you need to do, and just save changes. That way, whenever you go to the node status page and you click on Mesh Status, you'll notice here's the phone that I set up on the mesh network. So we can go ahead and configure that phone by clicking on it, and it'll present us with a place where we can type in our password. The default password for GrandStream is admin, and you can go ahead and log in. You'll be presented with this information right here. Now, if you go ahead and click on one of the accounts, I'd want to put this one on the second account, we can go ahead and change our account name to the new Broadband-Hamnet network. Our SIP server is the host name we set up for the Raspberry Pi, and in this example it was KF5JIM PBX. Outbound proxy is going to be the same thing. Our SIP user ID is our extension number we set, so we set 535546. And our authentication ID is going to be the same. Our authenticate password is going to be our secret we set up on the Asterisk server. So in this case that was QWERTY123. And if we scroll all the way down, and so we can go ahead and click Update. It'll ask to reboot that phone, and so we can go ahead and reboot it. We will watch it communicate with the Asterisk server, and right here, IP Phones Online will watch this number change from 0 to 1. And that tells me that that phone has successfully registered to the PBX server running on the Raspberry Pi. So we'll see it appear in a sec, and there it is. So now we have one of our two extensions currently online. So let's go ahead and set up the other one. Last but not least, after some configuring on the Cisco 7940 series VoIP phone, we can get it to communicate with the Asterisk server and place calls to and from this phone and from other phones to this phone. And now we have a deployable VoIP phone system. Now, to show you how this works real fast, we'll dial a phone number in the other part of the house here that is also connected to the Broadband-Hamnet network. And I'll go answer it.
Paul, showing you that audio works from one phone to the next over the Broadband-Hamnet. Goodbye.
So there you have it, 2 VoIP phones connected over the Broadband-Hamnet, all registered to one Raspberry Pi running an Asterisk PBX server. I hope you find this video tutorial helpful and useful, and as always, happy meshing.